London, 1814. Miss Winifred Northcott was an accomplished mathematician, a capable painter, and a disappointing daughter. At least, that was how her mother, Lady Northcott, had begun to regard her after 3 unsuccessful seasons. "Winifred, do stop hiding behind that potted palm," Lady Northcott hissed, her feathered turban quivering with frustration. "You might as well have worn a black bombazine for all the attention you're drawing in that drab gown." Winifred glanced down at her pale blue dress, which she had thought rather pretty when her maid had helped her into it. But standing against the grandeur of Lady Hartwell's ballroom, with its glittering chandeliers and the rainbow of silks adorning the tons most eligible young ladies, she felt as inconspicuous as a sparrow among peacocks. "I am not hiding, Mother, I am observing." Winifred adjusted her spectacles, which her mother had begged her to leave at home, "and I find the dynamics of courtship quite fascinating from a scientific perspective." Lady Northcott closed her eyes briefly, as if summoning patience from divine sources. "You are not here to conduct research, Winnie. You are here to find a husband before you are firmly on the shelf at the decrepit age of 23. The truth, which Winifred dared not voice aloud, was that she had long ago accepted spinsterhood as her fate. She had constructed an entire belief system around it. Marriage was merely a societal transaction designed to transfer female guardianship from father to husband. Love, that ephemeral emotion poets waxed lyrical about, was nothing more than a chemical reaction in the brain designed by nature to ensure reproduction. Better to remain unwed and dedicate herself to her studies than surrender her modest independence to a man who would likely find her too bookish, too bespectacled, too Winifred. "Look, the Oxley party has arrived," her mother whispered, abandoning all pretense of subtlety as she craned her neck. "The Duke is with them." Winifred had heard rumors about the newly minted Duke of Queensbury. After his father's unexpected death 6 months prior, Quentin Oxley had returned from his grand tour to assume the dukedom. Society buzzed with tales of his escapades on the continent, duels fought, hearts broken, fortunes gambled. The typical pursuits of a wealthy aristocrat with too much time and too little supervision. "Perhaps he will dance with Penelope Fenwick," Winifred said, nodding toward the golden-haired beauty surrounded by admirers. "I hear her dowry is substantial enough to repair even Queensbury's allegedly crumbling estates." "Allegedly," her mother sniffed, being the operative word. "The Oxley fortune is as solid as the Bank of England, mark my words." Before Winifred could formulate a suitably sardonic response, the crowd parted, and she caught her first glimpse of the Duke of Queensbury. He was tall, taller than most men in the room, with the broad shoulders of a man who had not spent his entire life lounging in drawing rooms. His dark hair was cut fashionably, but not foppishly, and his features were striking rather than classically handsome. A strong jaw, a straight nose, and eyes that, even from a distance, seemed to observe the room with the same analytical attention Winifred herself employed. When those eyes suddenly met hers, Winifred felt an unexpected jolt, as if she had miscalculated a mathematical equation. She quickly averted her gaze, adjusting her spectacles with trembling fingers. "He's looking this way," Lady Northcott whispered with poorly concealed excitement. "More likely at Lady Jersey behind us," Winifred replied, but her heart had accelerated to a most unscientific rhythm. The evening progressed as most balls did for Winifred. She danced one obligatory quadrille with her second cousin, a gangly clergyman who stepped on her toes thrice and apologized profusely each time. After that, she retired to her preferred position along the wall, where she could observe the mating rituals of the ton without participating in them. It was during the supper dance that the impossible occurred. "Miss Northcott, I believe." The deep voice startled her from her contemplation of the architectural merits of Lady Hartwell's ceiling cornices. Winifred looked up to find the Duke of Queensbury standing before her, one dark eyebrow raised inquiringly. "Your Grace," she managed, dropping into a curtsy that was more functional than graceful. You have the advantage of me. His lips curved slightly. Evidently, since you know my name and title, while I had to inquire about yours from Lady Jersey. Winifred blinked, processing this information. You inquired about me. There must be some mistake. I'm gratified to know the Duke of Queensbury is capable of making mistakes, he said, eyes glinting with what might have been amusement. What error have I committed now? I merely meant that I am not generally the subject of ducal inquiries, Winifred explained, feeling uncomfortably warm despite the ballroom's ample ventilation. And yet here we are, the Duke extended his hand. The next set is forming. Would you do me the honor? Winifred stared at his gloved hand as if it were a snake poised to strike. But it's a waltz. Indeed. Your powers of observation are impressive. I don't waltz. The confession emerged more sharply than intended. Cannot or will not, he asked, his hand remaining steadfastly extended. Both, neither. Winifred took a steadying breath. I have not been taught. Instead of the mockery or pity she expected, the Duke merely nodded thoughtfully. Then we shall remedy that deficiency immediately. Come. Before she could formulate a logical objection, Winifred found herself being led not to the dance floor, but through a set of French doors onto a deserted terrace. The cool night air was a relief after the stuffy ballroom, but propriety immediately asserted itself. Your Grace, we cannot be seen from this particular section of the terrace. Correct. Lady Hartwell's architectural choices work in our favor. He turned to face her, his expression suddenly serious. Miss Northcott, would you permit me to teach you the basic steps of the waltz? I promise to return you to the ballroom with your reputation intact. Curiosity, her besetting sin, according to her mother, won out over caution. Why would you wish to teach me to dance? Perhaps I find your analytical gaze intriguing. Or perhaps I simply wish to dance with someone who isn't plotting matrimonial strategies while counting my steps. He held out his hands. Shall we begin? The next quarter hour was simultaneously the most mortifying and exhilarating of Winifred's life. The Duke proved an unexpectedly patient teacher, guiding her through the basic 1-2-3 rhythm with firm hands and quiet instruction. When she trod upon his polished boot for the third time, Winifred attempted to disengage. This is futile. I have all the grace of a newborn colt. Nonsense, you're approaching this too academically. His hand tightened slightly at her waist. Dancing isn't mathematics, Miss Northcott. It's music given physical form. Stop counting and simply feel. Winifred looked up at him skeptically. That advice is remarkably imprecise for a man who, I'm told, excelled at Cambridge. A flash of genuine surprise crossed his features. You've researched my academic history. Certainly not, she said quickly, though in truth, she had read with interest a society column mentioning his university distinctions. It was merely something overheard in conversation. How fortunate that your ears happened to be in the vicinity of such flattering gossip. His smile was knowing. Now shall we try again, without counting? Winifred took a deep breath and nodded. As they resumed their impromptu lesson, she tried to follow his advice, allowing the rhythm to guide her rather than meticulously tracking each step. To her astonishment, their movement gradually smoothed into something approximating grace. There, the Duke said softly, as they completed a full turn without mishap. You're dancing. The simple affirmation, spoken without condescension, caused an unfamiliar warmth to bloom in Winifred's chest. For a breathless moment, they continued to circle the terrace, no longer in a formal lesson, but in a true dance, their gazes locked in mutual discovery. The spell was broken by the sound of approaching voices. The Duke immediately led Winifred to a shadowed alcove, positioning himself to shield her from view as a giggling couple passed by, oblivious to their presence. I believe our lesson must conclude, he said, when the interlopers had disappeared back into the ballroom. But I would consider it a privilege if you would honor me with a proper dance at Lady Westmoreland's ball next week. Winifred adjusted her spectacles, using the familiar gesture to regain her composure. That would be most unexpected. I find unexpected events are often the most rewarding. He bowed over her hand. Until then, Miss Northcott. As she watched him stride back into the ballroom, Winifred tried to make sense of the encounter. Why would the Duke of Queensbury single her out? What possible motive could he have for teaching a wallflower to dance? The only conclusion her logical mind could reach was decidedly unsettling. Either the Duke had lost a wager that required him to dance with the most overlooked young lady in attendance, or he was engaging in some form of elaborate jest at her expense. Either possibility was enough to harden her resolve. Whatever game the Duke was playing, Winifred Northcott had no intention of being its pawn. She would not attend Lady Westmoreland's ball. "You cannot possibly be serious," Lady Northcott declared 3 days later, regarding her daughter with unconcealed horror. "The Duke of Queensbury personally requests your presence, and you intend to decline." Winifred continued sorting her collection of pressed botanical specimens, refusing to meet her mother's gaze. "I have a prior engagement." "With whom? Your books, your ridiculous specimens." Lady Northcott swept a hand toward the table where Winifred was working. "No engagement could possibly take precedence over Lady Westmoreland's ball, especially when—" She trailed off, narrowing her eyes suspiciously. "Unless you are not telling me something. Did the Duke behave improperly during your conversation at Lady Hartwell's?" "Certainly not," Winifred replied, perhaps too quickly. "His Grace was the model of decorum." "Then I fail to understand your reluctance." Lady Northcott sank onto a chair, her expression shifting from outrage to calculation. "Unless— oh, how obtuse I've been. You're employing strategy." Winifred finally looked up. "Strategy. Playing hard to obtain." Lady Northcott nodded approvingly, "making him wonder if you'll appear. Clever girl. I wouldn't have thought you capable of such feminine artifice." Before Winifred could correct this wildly inaccurate interpretation, the butler appeared at the drawing-room door. "A delivery for Miss Northcott." The footman behind him carried a large wooden box, which he placed carefully on an empty table before departing. Winifred approached it cautiously, as if it might contain some exotic and possibly dangerous creature. "Well, open it," her mother urged, hovering at her shoulder. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, lay a book. Not just any book, but a rare edition of Euclid's Elements that Winifred had coveted after seeing it in a bookshop window months ago, only to discover it had been sold when she returned with sufficient funds. Attached was a note in a bold, masculine hand: "Miss Northcott. In preparation for our dance at Lady Westmoreland's, I thought you might appreciate this mathematical treatise on the geometry of movement. I shall endeavor to discuss its merits with you between sets, provided you are not claimed for every dance by more worthy partners. Queensbury." "Oh my," Lady Northcott breathed, reading over her daughter's shoulder. "The man is besotted." "He is nothing of the sort," Winifred protested, though her fingers traced the book's leather binding with reverent care. "This is merely." For once, her formidable vocabulary failed her. What was this, precisely? A bribe, a jest, a genuine gesture of shared intellectual interest. "It is a courtship gift," her mother declared triumphantly, "and an exquisite one, not flowers or trinkets, but something chosen with specific consideration of your peculiar interests. Winnie, I may have misjudged the Duke. He sees your value." Winifred wanted to dismiss her mother's romantic interpretation, but the evidence before her was difficult to refute. The Duke had not only remembered their conversation, but had somehow discovered her interest in mathematics and located a volume she had been unable to acquire herself. "I suppose," she said slowly, "I could reconsider my decision about Lady Westmoreland's ball." Her mother's smug smile was almost unbearable. The night of Lady Westmoreland's ball arrived with unseasonable warmth, forcing the hostess to open every window and door to create cross-ventilation. Winifred, dressed in a new gown of deep emerald silk that her mother had insisted upon, to complement your eyes, which are your best feature, dear, found herself unusually nervous as their carriage joined the queue outside the Westmoreland mansion. "Remember, walk with your shoulders back," Lady Northcott instructed for perhaps the dozenth time, "and do try not to discuss insects or mathematics unless specifically asked." "Yes, Mother," Winifred replied automatically, though her mind was elsewhere. She had spent the intervening days alternating between anticipation and dread. What if the Duke had merely been amusing himself? What if he had forgotten their arrangement entirely? What if, most terrifying of all, he had been sincere? They had barely completed the receiving line when Winifred sensed a presence at her elbow. She turned to find the Duke of Queensbury, resplendent in evening attire, regarding her with what appeared to be genuine pleasure. "Miss Northcott, you came." Something in his tone suggested he had harbored doubts. Winifred squared her shoulders. "Your mathematical bribe was effective, Your Grace." "Not a bribe," he corrected, eyes crinkling at the corners. "A preemptive peace offering, in case I prove to be as clumsy a dancing partner as I fear." "I find that difficult to believe, given your performance at Lady Hartwell's." "You found my performance worthy of note." "How gratifying," he offered his arm. "The first set is forming. Shall we demonstrate your newly acquired skills?" Before she could respond, Lady Northcott materialized beside them, beaming like a cat that had found an unguarded cream pot. "Your Grace, how delightful to see you again. Winifred has been quite looking forward to this evening, haven't you, dear?" Winifred felt heat rising to her cheeks. "Mother." "Lady Northcott," the Duke interrupted smoothly, "I've just been telling your daughter how much I admire her botanical knowledge. The specimens she has collected are quite remarkable." Lady Northcott blinked in confusion. "Specimens, but how would you know about?" "If you'll excuse us," he continued, "I believe Miss Northcott promised me this dance." Without waiting for a response, he guided Winifred toward the dance floor, leaving her mother gaping behind them. "You've never seen my botanical collection," Winifred accused, as they took their positions for the country dance. "A minor deception in service of rescuing you from maternal embarrassment," he grinned, unrepentant. "Though I would genuinely like to see these specimens someday, I maintain a modest interest in natural sciences myself." The dance began before Winifred could determine if this, too, was mere flattery. To her surprise, she found herself enjoying the intricate patterns of the country dance, particularly when they brought her back to the Duke, whose attentive gaze never wavered from her face. "You seem more at ease tonight," he observed during a promenade. "Perhaps because I am not being ambushed with unexpected dance lessons on darkened terraces," she replied dryly. He laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "Tâchez, Miss Northcott, though I notice you have not fled to the shelter of the wall hangings yet." "The night is young, Your Grace." Their verbal sparring continued through 2 more dances, during which Winifred discovered that the Duke possessed not only a razor-sharp intellect, but also a surprising breadth of knowledge. He debated the merits of various translations of Homer, discussed the latest scientific theories regarding electricity, and demonstrated a thorough understanding of political economics that matched her own well-read opinions. During the supper break, he procured a plate for her and led her to a relatively quiet corner, where they could converse without shouting over the general din of the ballroom. "You have me at a disadvantage," Winifred said, as she nibbled at a slice of cold pheasant. "You appear to know a great deal about my interests, while I know very little of yours beyond what gossip columns report." "And what do these columns suggest?" he asked, his expression carefully neutral. Winifred hesitated, then decided honesty was preferable to coy evasion. "That you gambled away half your inheritance in Monte Carlo, fought a duel over an Italian countess, and returned to England only because your father's death forced you to assume your responsibilities." To her relief, he did not appear offended. "An entertaining narrative, certainly. Would it disappoint you to learn that I spent most of my time abroad studying architectural innovations and agricultural methods that might be implemented on the Queensbury estates? That would depend on whether you're merely attempting to present yourself in a more favorable light." His eyebrows rose. "You doubt my sincerity. I question why the Duke of Queensbury, newly returned to London and undoubtedly the most eligible bachelor of the season, would devote his attention to a confirmed wallflower with spectacles and unfashionable interests." Winifred met his gaze directly. "What game are you playing, Your Grace?" For a long moment, he studied her face with an intensity that made her wish she had been less blunt. Then, to her astonishment, he smiled. "No game, Miss Northcott. Merely the actions of a man who, upon entering Lady Hartwell's ballroom, saw a young woman observing the proceedings with intelligence and humor rather than desperation or calculation." He leaned forward slightly. "Do you know how refreshing that is? To converse with someone who isn't mentally measuring me for a wedding suit." Winifred blinked. "I'm not entirely convinced that's true." "Which part?" "That ladies are measuring you for matrimony. It seems more likely they're calculating the value of your estates and title." He laughed again, drawing curious glances from nearby guests. "God, you're magnificent. Yes, precisely. They see a dukedom, not a man. You, on the other hand, seem determined to see the worst in me, which paradoxically makes me believe you might eventually see me clearly." Winifred was saved from having to respond to this confusing declaration by the return of the musicians to their dais, signaling the resumption of dancing. But as the Duke escorted her back to the dance floor, she found herself increasingly troubled by the possibility that he might be sincere, a possibility that threatened the carefully constructed worldview she had built around her spinsterhood. Over the next fortnight, the Tun buzzed with speculation about the Duke of Queensbury's apparent interest in the bookish Miss Northcott. When he appeared at the Northcott residence for a morning call, bringing with him a rare orchid specimen for Winifred's collection, Lady Northcott nearly swooned with excitement. When he escorted Winifred on a promenade through Hyde Park, driving his own curricle rather than delegating the task to a groom, the gossip columns devoted an entire paragraph to analyzing the significance. For Winifred herself, these attentions were both thrilling and terrifying. Each encounter with the Duke, Quentin, as he had asked her to call him in private, revealed new facets of his character that contradicted her initial assessment. He was neither the dissolute rake of gossip nor the paragon of ducal virtue her mother imagined. Instead, he was something far more dangerous, a man whose intelligence matched her own, whose conversation stimulated rather than bored, and whose gaze made her wonder if perhaps there was some merit to poets' effusions after all. But doubt lingered. What could a duke possibly want with her beyond the novelty of her unfashionable mind? Surely once that novelty wore thin, he would return to women like Penelope Fenwick, whose beauty and social graces were beyond reproach. These doubts crystallized into conviction when Winifred overheard a conversation at Lady Clarendon's musicale that was clearly not meant for her ears. "I still don't understand it," Lord Pembroke was saying to Sir Walter Finch as Winifred approached the refreshment table, temporarily hidden from their view by a large floral arrangement. "Queensbury could have his pick of the season's beauties, yet he's wasting his time on that Northcott bluestocking." "Haven't you heard?" Sir Walter replied, his voice lowered conspiratorially. "It's a wager. Lord Rutherford bet £5,000 that Queensbury couldn't transform the most overlooked wallflower into the talk of the Tun before the season's end." "Good God," Lord Pembroke chuckled. "And here I thought the man had lost his senses. That explains it then, though I must say he's being devilishly thorough about it. Half the matrons in London are convinced he'll offer for her." "That would be carrying a jest too far, even for Queensbury," Sir Walter replied. No, I expect he'll reveal the game at Lady Melbourne's masquerade next week, claim his winnings, and leave Miss Northcott to return to her books and butterflies. Winifred stood frozen, a curious numbness spreading through her limbs. Of course, it had been a wager all along. How could she have allowed herself, even for a moment, to believe otherwise? With mechanical composure, she collected a glass of lemonade and returned to her mother's side, where she sat through 3 musical performances without hearing a single note. When the Duke arrived later in the evening and sought her out, she excused herself with a feigned headache, ignoring the concern in his eyes and the way his hand reached toward hers before propriety recalled it to his side. For the next 3 days, Winifred refused all callers, claiming illness. She rebuffed the Duke's inquiries and returned his letters unopened. Even the arrival of a crate containing an actual camera obscura, a device she had once mentioned wanting to experiment with, failed to soften her resolve. "This is madness," Lady Northcott declared, pacing Winifred's bedchamber on the afternoon before Lady Melbourne's masquerade. "The Duke is clearly smitten, yet you persist in this inexplicable coldness. If you continue, you will lose him entirely." "One cannot lose what one never truly possessed," Winifred replied, not looking up from the mathematical treatise she was pretending to read. "What nonsense is this? The man has all but declared himself. Everyone expects an announcement at the masquerade tomorrow." "Then everyone will be disappointed." Winifred closed her book with a snap. "Mother, please. I have no wish to discuss the Duke further." "But what of your feelings? You cannot pretend you are indifferent to him." Winifred's composure wavered. "My feelings are irrelevant. The Duke's interest was never genuine." "What do you mean?" Briefly, Winifred related what she had overheard at the musicale. Lady Northcott listened with growing indignation, which surprised Winifred, who had expected her mother to be more upset about the potential loss of a ducal connection than about the injury to her daughter's heart. "Absolutely outrageous," Lady Northcott declared when Winifred finished. "I refuse to believe it. The Duke may have a reputation for wildness, but nothing in his behavior suggests such callous cruelty." "You are blinded by his title," Winifred said wearily. "And you are blinded by your insecurity." Lady Northcott sat on the edge of the bed, her expression softening. "Winnie, I know I have not always been understanding of your unique qualities. But even I can see that the Duke values precisely those aspects of your character that make you different from other young ladies. The way he looks at you is an accomplished performance," Winifred finished, ignoring the painful tightening in her chest. "Please, Mother, I've made my decision. I will not attend the masquerade." For once, Lady Northcott did not argue further. She merely sighed, patted Winifred's hand, and left the room with a troubled expression. Left alone, Winifred allowed herself to acknowledge the true extent of her hurt. Somehow, despite all her logical defenses, despite her firm belief that marriage was merely a social transaction, despite her acceptance of spinsterhood as her fate, somehow, the Duke of Queensbury had breached her carefully constructed walls. Worse, he had made her want things she had convinced herself were unnecessary: companionship, understanding, the particular warmth in his eyes when she said something that surprised him. All an illusion, crafted for a wager. The night of Lady Melbourne's masquerade arrived with appropriate dramatic weather, thunder rumbling in the distance as carriages deposited masked revellers at the grand entrance. Inside, the ballroom had been transformed into a fantastical woodland scene, with silk leaves hanging from the ceiling and cleverly disguised musicians playing from behind artificial trees. Winifred Northcott, contrary to her stated intentions, stood at the periphery of this enchanted forest, a domino mask concealing the upper half of her face. Her last-minute decision to attend had been prompted not by her mother's continued entreaties, but by a stubborn, irrational need to witness the Duke's triumph firsthand, to hear him admit to the wager and reveal her as the unwitting pawn in his game. Knowledge, even painful knowledge, was preferable to uncertainty. She had chosen her costume with deliberate irony, a butterfly complete with delicately painted wings attached to her gown of midnight blue silk. If she was to be publicly humiliated as a specimen in the Duke's collection, she would at least acknowledge her role in the tableau. For over an hour, she observed the festivities without participating, noting the Duke's tall figure as he moved through the crowd. He wore the costume of a Greek philosopher, a choice that struck her as particularly pointed given their discussions of classical literature. His mask concealed little of his identity. The set of his shoulders and the distinctive way he carried himself would have made him recognizable to anyone who had studied him as carefully as Winifred had. She watched as he danced with several partners, his manner perfectly correct, but lacking the animation she had glimpsed during their own dances. Twice he paused in his circuit of the room, scanning the crowd as if searching for someone. Each time, Winifred retreated further into the shadows, delaying the inevitable confrontation. It was nearing midnight, when masks would traditionally be removed, when Lord Rutherford approached the Duke with a glass of champagne and a smug expression visible even beneath his mask. Winifred edged closer, positioning herself behind a pillar where she could overhear their conversation without being immediately visible. "Well, Queensbury," Lord Rutherford drawled, "I believe the hour of reckoning approaches. Are you prepared to claim your victory or admit defeat?" The Duke accepted the champagne, but did not drink. "I'm not entirely certain what you're referring to, Rutherford." "Come now, no need for discretion. Everyone knows about our little wager concerning Miss Northcott, though I must say your dedication to the charade has been impressive. Most men would have tired of courting a blue-stocking wallflower long before now." Winifred's hands clenched in the folds of her gown, but she forced herself to remain still, waiting for the Duke's response. It came not in words, but in action. With deliberate precision, the Duke poured his untouched champagne over Lord Rutherford's elaborately curled hair. The surrounding conversations stuttered to a halt as Lord Rutherford sputtered in outrage, champagne dripping down his face. "What the devil do you think you're doing?" Correcting a misapprehension, the Duke replied, his voice dangerously quiet. "There is no wager, Rutherford. There never was. If you or anyone else has been spreading such malicious falsehoods about Miss Northcott, you will answer to me, not as a duke, but as a man who does not tolerate slander against a lady he holds in the highest esteem." Lord Rutherford wiped champagne from his eyes, his expression shifting from shock to calculation. "You can't possibly be serious. You actually care for the girl." "I love her," the Duke said simply, the words carrying clearly in the hushed silence that had fallen over the nearby guests. "And if I discover who originated this contemptible rumor, they will regret it most thoroughly." Winifred stood frozen behind her pillar, her mind struggling to process what she had just heard. The Duke loving her. Not as part of a wager, not as a jest, but sincerely. It seemed impossible. And yet the evidence before her, his righteous anger, the unequivocal declaration, suggested otherwise. Before she could decide how to respond, the Duke turned away from the sputtering Rutherford and addressed the assembled onlookers. "I came tonight hoping to find Miss Northcott, to offer my heart and hand. If anyone knows of her whereabouts, I would be most grateful for the information." A murmur ran through the crowd, but no one spoke. Winifred remained hidden, her pulse thundering in her ears. She should step forward. She should reveal herself. Instead, she fled. Gathering her skirts, she slipped from behind the pillar and made her way swiftly toward the terrace doors. She needed air, needed space to think. The Duke's declaration had upended every assumption, every certainty. If he truly loved her, if the rumors of a wager had been false, then she had misjudged him terribly. Worse, she had allowed her own insecurities to poison what might have been genuine happiness. The cool night air was a relief after the stifling ballroom. Winifred moved to the balustrade, removing her mask and drawing deep breaths as she tried to calm her racing thoughts. "I thought it might be you." She whirled to find the Duke standing in the doorway, his own mask dangling from his fingers. His expression was a complex mixture of hope and wariness. "How did you know?" Winifred asked, her voice barely audible. "The butterfly wings were a clue," he said, moving closer. "But mainly it was the way you stood, straight-backed, observing everything, participating in nothing. Your habitual pose at these affairs, until recently. You noticed how I stand. I've noticed everything about you, Winifred. From the first moment, I saw you at Lady Hartwell's, categorizing the social dynamics with that brilliant mind of yours." Winifred swallowed, her throat suddenly tight. "I heard what you said to Lord Rutherford." "Ah," he stopped a few feet away, maintaining a careful distance. "Then you know the truth." "Do I?" She gripped the stone balustrade for support. "I don't know what to believe anymore. For days I've been convinced you were merely fulfilling the terms of a wager, using me as an experiment in social manipulation. And now I wonder if I've made a terrible mistake." Winifred looked up at him, vulnerability naked in her gaze. "If I've allowed my fear and doubt to ruin something precious." The Duke, Quentin, closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. "Nothing is ruined, Winifred, nothing that cannot be mended." His thumbs traced gentle circles on her palms. "But I need to know, if there had been no rumor, no misunderstanding, if I had simply come to you with my heart in my hands, what would your answer have been?" Winifred looked into his eyes, searching for any hint of deception and finding only earnest question. In that moment, all her carefully constructed theories about marriage as a mere social transaction, all her logical arguments against romantic entanglement, crumbled beneath the weight of a simpler truth. She loved this man with his quick mind, his unexpected kindness, and his ability to see her, truly see her, when everyone else looked past. "I would have said yes," she whispered. "I would have said yes, and counted myself the most fortunate woman in England." Joy transformed his features. "Then say it now. Say you'll marry me, Winifred Northcott. Say you'll become my duchess, fill my libraries with your books, my conservatories with your specimens, and my life with your extraordinary self." Instead of answering immediately, Winifred rose on tiptoes and pressed her lips to his in a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened into something that made her glad of the balustrade supporting her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing unevenly, Winifred smiled. "I believe that constitutes an affirmative response, Your Grace." "Quentin," he corrected, his arms still circling her waist. "And while I appreciate the empirical approach to acceptance, I would still value verbal confirmation." Winifred laughed, a sound of pure, unrestrained happiness that surprised them both. "Yes, Quentin Oxley, yes, I will marry you. Though I warn you, I intend to maintain my collections and my studies, duchess or no." "I would expect nothing less." He smiled down at her. "In fact, I've already begun expanding the library at Queensbury House to accommodate your particular interests. And I thought perhaps we might convert the East Wing's solarium into a proper laboratory." Winifred stared at him in wonder. "You've been planning this for how long?" "Since our dance lesson on Lady Hartwell's terrace." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You stepped on my foot for the third time, looked up at me with those magnificent eyes full of frustration, and I knew I was lost." Before Winifred could respond to this astonishing revelation, the terrace doors opened and Lady Northcott emerged, her expression thunderous until she saw the tableau before her. "Oh, Your Grace." "Winifred," she blinked rapidly, taking in their clasped hands and Winifred's flushed cheeks. "I came to find my daughter after hearing the most extraordinary rumors about champagne and declarations, but I see perhaps the situation has resolved itself." "Indeed, Lady Northcott," Quentin replied, his smile widening. "I have just had the honor of proposing to your daughter, and she has done me the inestimable kindness of accepting." Lady Northcott's hand fluttered to her heart. "Oh, oh, my dear child." To Winifred's shock, tears welled in her mother's eyes. "I am so very happy for you both." As Lady Northcott swept forward to embrace her, Winifred caught Quentin's gaze over her mother's shoulder. The tenderness in his expression made her heart swell with emotions she had once dismissed as poetic excess, but now recognized as the most fundamental of truths. Love, it seemed, was not merely a chemical reaction designed for reproductive purposes. It was a force powerful enough to transform a wallflower into a duchess, a confirmed spinster into a bride, and a woman convinced of love's irrelevance into one who understood its essential truth. 6 months later, the Duchess of Queensbury stood in the center of her newly completed laboratory, surrounded by specimen cases, mathematical instruments, and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. Sunlight streamed through the glass roof, illuminating the space exactly as she had envisioned. "Does it meet with your Grace's approval?" her husband asked from the doorway, his expression one of barely contained pride. "It exceeds all expectations," Winifred replied, turning in a slow circle to admire her domain. "Though I must insist you not address me as Your Grace in private, it makes me feel like my mother-in-law." Quentin laughed, crossing the room to stand beside her. "As you wish, my love, though I must say you've adapted to duchessing with remarkable aplomb. Lady Jersey was singing your praises at the Haymarket last night. Apparently your reorganization of the Ladies' Educational Society has been deemed revolutionary." "A gross exaggeration. I merely suggested we focus on practical scientific education rather than ornamental accomplishments." Winifred leaned against him, savoring the solid warmth of his presence. "But I find I'm enjoying the platform the title provides. Who knew being a duchess could be so useful?" "I believe I mentioned something to that effect during our courtship," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Though I'm not certain you believed me at the time." "I was skeptical of many things then," she admitted, including the possibility that a duke might genuinely prefer a bespectacled bluestocking to a conventional beauty. Fortunately, you've since seen reason on that point. His arms encircled her waist. "Though I do regret the pain caused by that malicious rumor. Rutherford still can't show his face at White's without someone inquiring about his champagne bath." Winifred smiled at the memory. "It was worth the temporary heartache to hear you declare yourself so publicly. Besides, I've come to believe that a certain amount of doubt was necessary for my journey. If I hadn't questioned, hadn't examined my own assumptions about marriage and love, I might never have recognized the truth when it stood before me." "And what truth is that, my brilliant wife?" She turned in his arms, reaching up to trace the beloved contours of his face. "That sometimes, just sometimes, a wallflower and a duke can find in each other exactly what they never knew they were seeking." As his lips met hers in a kiss that promised a lifetime of shared discovery, Winifred reflected that perhaps the poets hadn't been so far off after all. There was indeed a mathematical precision to love, a perfect equation of minds and hearts that, once solved, revealed the most elegant solution of all.